Welcome from my office in Colorado Springs to Willie's office where are you specifically in California?
Monterey Park, California. We're nestled right in the heart of the San Gabriel Valley, and
Nice.
I'm actually about 8 minutes from downtown Civic Center.
Great, great. And we had a few technical difficulties yesterday, I think mostly because of Scott Dickin, but we've got those resolved now. And Willie, I've seen you at a couple LJE events, but we've never really had a chance to talk. So I'm really happy to do this.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, likewise.
Um, I know I was doing a little bit of research on your background, and frankly, I was pretty amazed at everything you've been involved in. You've been with Disney, with Warner, with Hanna-Barbera. You've received a number of awards, the Annie Award, I think, and several
Yeah.
others, and pretty impressive background
Well, thank you.
for a person who started out. Didn't you start out when you were about 20 years old? Is that about right?
I was 19.
19.
I just started at my schooling at Chenard's Art Institute, which today is California Institute of the Arts. And fortunately, I was mentored by, people like Mark Davis, one of Disney's 9 Old Men, and
Heard that name, yeah.
yeah. So, it was a good start of my career, but just for the hell of it, I thought I might like to visit the Walt Disney Studio. And since I had my portfolio with me, which was basically a student's portfolio,
Sure.
things I did in high school and even junior high school and all that. But I figured, well, I'll show something and have an excuse to see the inside of the Disney Studio. And they offered me an interview, and I went in and showed my portfolio, figuring, gosh, in 4 years, I'll really strike out looking for a job here at the studio. But in the meanwhile, I'll just take advantage of the fact that I'm in the studio, and I could tell people, classmates at Chenard's, hey, I've been inside of the Walt Disney Studio. But lo and behold, 2 weeks later, I was hired.
And you're working on Lady and the Tramp.
And of all things, the iconic spaghetti kissing scene is where I started my career, and then, of course, the rest is history. Because of my Disney training, Johnny Burton at Warner Brothers hired me and says, hey, I called him on the Friday I got notice at Disney that we're going to take a
Willie, when would that have been? What year would that have been?
June of 1954.
1954, okay.
Yeah. Your parents hadn't even met yet.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe not, but we'll go with it.
Yeah.
So 1954, they brought you over.
And so, my stint on Lady and the Tramp was short-lived only because we were on the tail end of the film, and we were put on overtime to get the film out on schedule. And so consequently, my night classes at Chenard's was compromised. And so I ended up only going on weekends. And finally, I having a full-time job, I dropped out of school to my regret today. I still tell young students that come to see me with their portfolio, if you got a good hold on an art school that you're attending, whether you're on scholarship or paying your way or whatever, try to get the most well-rounded education in art, because it'll certainly help you in cartooning. Because back then people used to think Ah, cartooning, got it. Yeah, when I was a kid, I used to draw cartoons. So it's like anyone could do cartoons. But it wasn't until I was at Disney that I realized, my gosh, cartooning is an art, a true
Yeah.
art.
What
Yeah.
always amazed me is a lot of the animators, their vocation is animation. Their avocation is fine art,
Yeah.
watercolors, oils,
Right.
fine art. And
Yeah.
that I never knew that. That surprised me quite a bit.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of friends of mine, they do paint on the side, and in their retirement, now they're doing fine art painting and
Yeah.
portraits and whatever, and they sell through galleries and all. And I never got that kind of a talent, So in my retirement, I'm still doing cartoons.
But Willie, are you 89? Is that how old you are?
89 in July, I will be big 90.
Big 90. What's also amazed me is not only the fine art, the migration over to fine art, but your hand, because I've seen some of your illustrations, and at 89 years old, I'll be happy to draw a squiggly line, and you draw things right on model.
I guess I am somewhat blessed because a lot of my cohorts, they've got the shakes, they got
Sure.
arthritis, or mentally they lost their creativity and all. And but so I am thankful that, at my age, I'm still at it, doing a lot of commissions, going to Comic Cons as guest
Sure.
and a whole bit. So, and then when I think about it, I guess I might be the very last survivor of termite terrace.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because you've been involved in both sides of it. By that I mean Frizz Frailing and Chuck.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what the difference was between the two of them from your perspective.
The first thing Fritz Freeling said to me when I joined his unit is, remember, our Bugs Bunny is different from Chuck's. So,
And it is, yeah.
yeah. So you have to unlearn everything you learned from Chuck when you come to work for me. Yeah, so yeah, I did see the difference, but my tendency would have been to continue drawing Bugs Bunny like Chuck's unit because that I really liked.
Yeah.
But oh no, Frizz made sure from day one that I was aware that I draw bugs in his style.
It's not,
And
by
in
golly, you're
all
in my
fairness,
unit. You're going to do it my way, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. That was the
Well, what was
order of the
Chuck like
day.
to work with? What was Chuck like to work with?
Well, he was truly a mentor because I really felt when Chuck gave you some kind of an instruction or guidance or whatever, you would take it seriously because when I first, I didn't get to know Chuck, but we were in the same class, night class at Chenard's.
Hmm.
Don Graham, who is the true, master of Chenard's, and he taught a lot of the Disney animators anatomy, and they would set up sketch classes in the sound stages at night, and Walt would encourage his animators to attend. And
Sure.
Doc Graham would be the one that would come in. And so since he was the dean of Chenard's Art Institute, and he's the one that initially looked at my samples and awarded me a scholarship that, I figured that Don Graham is the ultimate, and Chuck is in his class studying. Abe Levital was in there, and because Chuck would encourage us working in his unit to get involved, with
What do you mean by that?
artwork, even to the point of if you're going to be an animator, you're going to be doing some acting. So he encourages us to go to some kind of an acting workshop, which I
Wow.
did. And so while I was attending the workshop, this director, Tim Sullivan, came in and says he wants to stage Tea House of the August Moon at the Music Box Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. Unfortunately, the theater's no longer there, but it was a full-fledged theater and it was a full production. And because of our acting class was, had a lot of diversity, a lot of Asians. So it was a perfect school to approach to do a show like Tea House of the August Moon. So we all played the Okinawan villagers, and I was casted as the love interest, Lotus Blossom, who was the lead Asian girl. And then, of course, the part that Marlon Brando played in the movie, Sakini, was casted they casted a Caucasian actor with the rubber band eyes.
Which was not unusual in those days, which
Oh,
is
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
crazy,
yeah. The lead parts went to, Caucasian
Yeah.
actors, and but to give some sort of authenticity, they would have a lot of Asian extras milling around in the background, wearing kimonos and costumes and all that,
Now that's where you got your first Academy Award, right?
My first Academy.
Well, we'll move on from that.
Okay, yeah,
But
right.
but you were saying Chuck was a mentor. He was could
Yeah.
you disagree with Chuck?
Well, I won't verbally disagree and argue with them. Corny Cole was one of those guys that really had the gumption to just speak up and uh, tell it how it is, And but I was I kind of looked up to Chuck as the Almighty, and you don't mess with him.
And did Chuck listen to Corny?
Oh, yeah, yeah. That was one thing about Chuck. He wanted to hear opinions from his people. And so on Fridays, he would invite his animators to lunch. And it was, sort of businessy, but also
Now,
very social.
now, Willie, these were the liquid lunches, right?
I'm afraid animators are known for buying themselves. So,
Yeah, I've heard stories about dirty martinis and
oh,
other
that's my
things.
first experience as a kid getting, excuse the expression, shit-faced and falling flat on my face in Chuck's office.
That's funny.
And at that point, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm stretched out on his couch, and I would get up from my drunken stupor, thinking, well, I guess I better start packing up because I think this is going to be my last day. But
But it
Chuck,
wasn't.
no, he had a good laugh, and I think that's the animator's inauguration into the industry is to have a good drunk because that's all it was back then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe it. I believe
Every
it.
studio had their own respective watering hole. And because we were in Hollywood, uh, I forgot the name of that bar that we used to go to, but no, this was in Hollywood. Musso Frank's was one of them, except yeah, when we were at Termite Terrace, we were in Hollywood. So we would walk up the street to
Sure,
Moose Over or whatever. But when we relocated into Burbank on the main lot, Smokehouse was one of the watering holes. And Disney animators had their own place. And at that time, there was no Hanna-Barbera. But later, when I was at Hanna-Barbera, all the studios were pretty much in the Burbank area. And you go down Riverside Drive and had all kind of watering hole. And it became a favorite from people from their respective studios. On
sure.
Thursdays, that's when the Eagle flew. And so everyone left the studio, went to the bank, cashed their checks, went to their favorite watering hole, and went home broke.
Were you encouraged to interact with, when you were at Warner or Disney, were you encouraged to interact with other studios, or was that pretty much,
Yeah,
no, we don't want you to?
the animation community is rather small and almost incestuous. And
We
so
won't go on that. We won't go
no.
down that.
So we would get together, compare notes. It was always fun to compare notes.
Sure.
And so, either a long lunch or after work, we would go to a place like the Smokehouse, and they would have a spread, hors d'oeuvres and all that, and
Hmm.
happy hour drinks. And back then, happy hour drinks were like 35 cents for a tall highball.
The good
And
old days. Yeah.
oh, good old days. Of course, I was, making about $40 a week. So, a drink of that price was very welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. But you
Yeah.
did share ideas and critiques and
Oh,
everything
oh, oh,
else
yeah,
with other
yeah.
people. And
We would compare and see right next to the smokehouse
Mhm.
uh, was a little known studio that called UPA.
Sure.
And UPA was known for Mr. Magoo and Jeremy McBoing Boing and all that. Well, UPA was the hottest studio in town. So
This was the late
Chuck,
50s. Late 50s, probably.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so, Chuck, Frizz, the Patty Freeding, MGM cartoons, and Disney, they were so used to copying the Academy Awards every year for the best animated short subject. And suddenly, this little studio UPA comes on the horizon, and with their little Jeremy McBoing Boing and Mr. Magoo cartoons, along with other specialty type cartoons that they would come up with, they were starting to be the new kid
They were
on
noticed. Yeah. Yeah.
copying all the Academy Awards. And all that. And so uh, a lot of the animators that was working at UPA were part of that Disney strike in the
Sure. In the 40s. Yeah.
so it was like one of these things to Walt Disney. So
Wow.
Walt went to one of his key guys, Ward Kimball, and says, "Hey, these studios, it's okay about Looney Tunes and MGM, but UPA, that's really a crawl in his back." And so it says, we got to do something about that. And so
Willie, was that because of the style or just because you were winning so many awards?
the style was very innovative at that time.
Yeah.
It was, stylized animation. It was real designy, and
Yeah.
it got away from the normal Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry humor. it was still done with a lot of crash and boom and comedy, but the style was something that was becoming overcoming the industry, because suddenly all indie business say, wow, this is a very new innovative style, and it's
Is it fair to
people
say
are beginning to
simplistic? Is it fair to call it simplistic? Or maybe just the opposite? I
simplistic
don't know.
design. Yeah.
Hmm,
A lot of design elements, and so it was very well thought out. And then the animation preceded Hanna-Barbera's limited animation.
sure.
UPA called it stylized animation,
Got it.
and so they were able to save a lot of money in production,
Sure.
and so when studios like Hanna-Barbera started up, and then with the volume of work that was required, Hanna-Barbera had to resort to some sort of a shortcut. And they made that transition very smoothly. And then a lot of the animators that were so attuned to the Tom and Jerry and the Chuck Jones animation was able to help in the development of the same, we call it same as animation.
Gotcha.
So we use Fred Flintstone walking in probably 10 different segments or episodes, because we had a library of same as animation, standard mouth actions, vowels and consonants, and they would just make sure that the animation from show number 1 and show number 12, we could use basically the same animation. And so it became quite excuse me,
I really have
systematic.
to stop for a sec. I have to stop for a second because I think we're having video problems. Scott, are you having the same issues I'm having?
Scott Ryder?
Yes,
Yes.
it's the video, the audio is stuttering a little.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think we're okay though. Let's keep going. But one
It
of the
sounds
things that
okay on this end.
what's that?
It sounds fine over here.
Okay, good. Well, the one thing that I'm amazed about,
yeah.
frankly, is you went from Disney. I mean, we're talking perfection to what I'll call limited animation with the Jetsons and the Flintstones and that kind of thing. So you saw the whole transition.
Oh, yeah.
How did you
Yeah.
feel about that? Good, bad, just
Well,
necessary, or?
it was funny that, I started my career at the ultimate studio, Walt Disney, the ultimate equipment and atmosphere and the
Yeah.
whole. And then on that Friday, since we were told to take 3 months off before Sleeping Beauties came down the pike, so I figured, well, since I did speak to Johnny Burton that same summer, he looked at my portfolio, liked it, and says he would have hired me, except they don't train. So that when I got notice, I went right to the phone, called Johnny Burton, and says, well, I'm trained now. And so Johnny Burton says,
Yeah.
come on in. So come Monday morning, Cornico and I, we were in the same bullpen together, and we got notice same time. So I told Corny, hey, I just got hired at Warner Brothers. So here's a phone number. Why don't you give them a call? And he did, and he got hired. So the both of us started Monday morning at Termite Terrace.
And who hired you? Was that Leon or who was that?
It was a fellow named Johnny Burton.
Oh, it was Johnny Burton. Okay. I know he
Leon
encouraged
Schlesinger
you.
was
Yeah.
gone then. It was Eddie Seltzer was running
Oh.
the Warner Brothers. Yeah. And so it was quite a culture shock coming from the
I believe it.
ultimate studio Disney to Termite Terrace. And so, but being a young kid, heck, I was happy to be working, especially in animation. And I wanted to get in the animation business since I was 5 years old and never departed from my desires. So here I am at Termite Terrace, but to me, it was like, wow, this is, I'm going to meet a whole new set of my idols. And
And you did. And you did.
yeah, I did. And working on, the classic Looney Tune characters like Bugs Bunny and all, which I grew up with. And so it was really something. And so when Disney called me back, it was kind of a hard decision. But fortunately, because of the fact that I got trained at Disney, my work was, Chuck noticed my work. And so when Ken Harris, I would do assistant work, but we were all in a bullpen. So we were handed scenes at random. So I
At
maybe worked,
random, meaning within the same cartoon or different cartoons even?
yeah, this Green cartoon might be in production at that time.
Wow.
And they had stacks of scenes, and at random, they would just say, okay, here's a scene. And so on my first day at Termite Terrace, I was giving a Fritz Freeling's Speedy Gonzalez scene, and
Sure.
Speedy Gonzalez compared to Lady from Lady in the Tramp was like night and day, but
I would say.
so that's but because of
Wow.
the fine training that we received at Disney's, I was able to carry that training onto Hanna-Barbera, or rather the Warner Brothers characters.
Yeah.
But Chuck was I guess you might say the prized unit, so to speak. Everyone wanted to work in Chuck Jones's unit. We felt that Chuck was the premier director at Warner Brothers. And so to be chosen to join Chuck's unit, and Ken Harris, who was one of the premier animators for Chuck,
Mhm.
it was one of his scenes that I worked on that got me chosen to join Chuck's unit.
Really?
So, yeah, I was forever grateful to Ken Harris and Chuck Jones. And see, a lot of the guys in my bullpen, they started at Warner Brothers, and they were waiting for their turn to be chosen to go into a unit.
Now, when you say the bullpen, what does that mean?
That means at that time there was about 8 guys just sitting there doing what we
In
call
betweens, or what were they doing?
yeah, just by getting random scenes given. A guy named Lou Irwin was in charge, and he would hand out scenes and make a chart as to who's doing what. And so some of the guys were in that bullpen for 10, 15 years waiting for their turn. And here comes Corny and myself, fresh out of Disney, and we're there just about a month, and boom, we're being assigned to a unit. And
That's
of all
pretty
the
heady. That's heady
units,
stuff. That's big stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah. Yeah. And
So I
I
have to ask
didn't
you, Willie.
really appreciate it. Yeah,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. You
Oh,
appreciate,
well, being a young kid, yeah, I didn't really appreciate what what that meant. In retrospect, when I think back on my career and then being handpicked by Ken Harris and Chuck Jones, it's like, wow, I should have really given it a little more uh, credence, I guess you might say.
but I have to say,
But
the other part of it is you were there during the heyday. Yeah,
it was,
in my humble opinion, there's some wonderful cartoons in the 40s, so I don't mean to dismiss them. And kudos to Bob McKimson and Tex Avery and Frizz and everybody else. But those cartoons from 55 to 60 that Chuck did and you were in his unit are pretty amazing.
oh yeah, like when I worked on One Froggy Evening and What's Opera Doc. Well, with What's
I
Opera
think
Doc,
we've heard of those. Yeah, we've heard of those, I think.
oh, right, yeah. And of course, What's Opera Doc was Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd. But One Froggy Evening was new.
Right.
And so it was kind of fun working on a new character. And Ken Harris was always somewhat typecasted by Chuck because he did good dancing scenes. So
It's kind
whenever,
of, excuse me, didn't Virgil do that for Frizz? Wasn't
for
Virgil
Frizz,
the
yeah,
dancer? And
yeah, right. And so as a result, I was able to work on following up Ken Harris doing a lot of the great dance things, and it was
Mhm.
great. But speaking of Virgil, there was an animator named Jerry Shinneke
Sure.
in
Yeah.
prison.
Yep.
And he was assigned to work on a little cartoon Frizz was directing called Three Little Bops.
Oh,
And there was
sure.
a
The
tape
music, jazz. Yeah.
music, Stan Freberg and the cornet thing. And during that period, I used to, in the evenings, I had a nice social life of going to clubbing. And so the bops
You're getting a
was
reputation
very
here,
popular.
Willie. You're getting a reputation here, you know.
And I'm self-admitting to my reputation. So uh, anyway, Jerry Shinneke was assigned to the Three Pigs to be doing the bop step while they were playing their
Sure.
instrument. And so Jerry calls me and says, "Hey, would you come to my office?" So I did. And he had a little Bolex camera set up. And he says, "I understand you know how to do the bop step." I say, "Yeah, well, so I demonstrated, and then he turned on the camera and shot me doing it. And so I was a reference to any or any of the dancing stuff that was in the Three Little Bops.
So this is when you got your
Uncredited.
second Tony.
I'm
You got your
sorry?
Tony then, right? For dancing? You got your Tony for dancing
Oh,
then?
Tony. Yes. So I've got all the awards now.
Yes, you do. But
Yeah.
that's great. So he used you as the model to animate
Yeah.
the three bops.
Yeah,
Wow.
right. Of course, we didn't get into anything like excuse me 1 second, I'll just turn it off. Sorry about that.
That's probably the Tony's calling.
Yeah, right. Hi, Dad. Oh, well, fine. I'm on a Zoom right now, so can I call you back? Okay, thanks, Dad. Right. Bye-bye. Okay, so yeah, because rotoscoping would have been too expensive.
Sure.
And he just wanted to see how my footwork was, and he was able to emulate it. So every so often when I see three little bops on TV or something, I say, hey, that's how I
That's me.
used to do it. Can't
I mean,
do
that's a wonderful cartoon that I don't think is shown very often. I don't think
I
people
know.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
People know Frizz primarily, I think, for Tweety and Sylvester and those kinds of things. But
Right. Yeah.
Three Little Bops is a wonderful little cartoon.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's like One Frog Evening for Chuck.
Yeah,
Kind of a
it
one
is.
shot. Yeah.
It is. Well, I'm getting the close signal here.
Oh,
So,
okay.
but I have to ask you, two things. Your favorite cartoon, doesn't have to be Chuck's, doesn't have to be whatever, but your favorite cartoon. And I do want to know what your one, excuse me, favorite memory of Chuck is.
Well,
So favorite cartoon.
yeah, people often ask me that, assuming, hey, it's got to be Lady in the Tramp because that's my first venture. I said,
That would
yeah,
not be bad. Yeah.
I would say, working on Lady was quite an experience. And he said, well, you've always been a big Mickey Mouse collector, so that's what got to be your favorite character. I said, well, yeah, I collect Mickey and all that and whatever. He says, well, then of course, when I went over to Bob Clampett's, I redesigned all of his puppet characters into animated characters. So
Now, is this Beanie and Cecil are you referring to?
yeah, the
Okay.
cartoon version.
Yeah.
And so they said, well, how about Beanie and Cecil? Yeah, it's on my list, and Hanna-Barbera, yeah, your first venture there was the Jetsons. I said, yeah, all of these I enjoy, but I've got to admit, my very most favorite cartoon that I worked on and still is J. Michigan Frog from, One Froggy Evening. And so a lot of people at that time says, oh, I never heard of it, I said, well, they do run it from time to time on Boomerang or whatever. But yeah, One Froggy,
Now,
Jamie.
Willie, you're not getting paid to endorse that. But okay, your memory of Chuck. Best memory of Chuck.
Well, I think my immediate memory of Chuck was he was very patient. He was very psychological. He was well read.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And myself being 22-year-old kid, I think he found a lot of humor in how I was adopting to the industry. And the guys that were working, guys like Ken Harris and Abe Levital and all that, they were very serious. They sat down and they turned out some beautiful animation and all that. And being a younger kid, I I tend to raise hell and all that. But the fact is, Chuck saw me for who I was and what I did, and he did respect my abilities, and he tried to do whatever he can to throw me a bone once in a while, because he knew that I started out hoping to maybe become an animator, but once I got entrenched in the business, I sort of saw doing layouts, character designs, and even doing some writing like Mike Maltese or Ted Pierce, Warren Foster.
Amazing.
And so Chuck would, on occasion, he would See, he would have Ken Harris co-direct some cartoons.
And Maurice Noble too.
Yeah, and Maurice, yeah. And so at that time, uh, see, Chuck used to design his own incidental characters. But Ken, when he was co-directing, Chuck would say, well, why don't you have Willie design this character or that character? Which, I was very pleased that
Yeah, flattered.
yeah. And then, of course, we did a series for Dr. Frank Baxter. It was a science series that was, I guess you might say, episode was assigned to different studios around town. So Chuck was animation director for one of the ones that Warner Brothers was assigned to. And so he had myself, one of my co-workers, Bob Singer, and a fellow named Lou Scheimer, who later became head of Filmations.
Sure,
And
Filmations, yeah.
three of us put into a nice little office away from the cartoon division near the main lot. And then we had our own unit doing layouts, stories, character designs, and all that for this science series, So that was a nice bone. And then when Frizz was looking for someone to replace Holly Pratt, who is now being groomed to become a director.
Yeah, that's big shoes to fill.
Yeah, and so Frizz went to Chuck and says, you think I could borrow Willie for a picture? And Chuck says, oh, very good. And so I was given that opportunity and did my first credited layout. Prince Violent was the original name. It was later changed to Prince Varmint for television purposes. And that was my very first Warner Brothers screen credit.
And that was when, 1956?
1960.
No,
Wait, no.
Warner's would have been 50 something.
Yeah, it was when Bob Clampett was starting up. So what happened is I finished that one cartoon.
Ah,
Fritz liked it, Holly Pratt liked it, and it looked like I may become the heir apparent to Fritz Freeling's of being a layout man.
wow.
But I got a call from Bob Clampett's studio. I never knew Bob Clampett at that time, but he probably heard of me, and so his secretary called. I went down into Hollywood, met with Bob Clampett for the first time, and then I was very familiar with this Time for Beanie
Sure.
puppet show. And he says, well, Mattel and ABC has bought Beanie and Cecil as a cartoon series. So will you be interested in coming in and being head of my layout department? And before we hire a crew, you're going to have to sit down and redesign all of my puppet characters into animated characters. And I thought, wow, that's a great challenge. So I went back to Chuck and Frizz and said, well, I'm going to be leaving because I got this offer I can't refuse.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like it though.
And
It really was.
because Clampett doubled my salary from what I was making at Warner's. So that was something that Chuck and Frizz could match. And then, but Chuck says, Bob is going to be involved in a television series. and it's going to be pretty much fly by night because we're working on theatricals and we're going to be here forever. And so I said, well, I'm going to have to take the Bob Clampett offer. So I would go over there,
Sure.
and a few months later, all of a sudden, all of these guys from theatrical cartoons from like Disney and all that is knocking on our door at Bob Clampett's looking for work because they could see the handwriting on the wall.
Sure.
Yeah. But then I guess Warner's did the Miss Olympic feature, and then the buzz around town was, well, this might be the swan song film, you know.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, Willie, you and I are going to get double our salary for this interview. Waiting to see that check. But I have to say, thank you so much for taking the time to talk. We love hearing about, I mean, I think your history is pretty amazing because you've gone through so many different kind of cycles of animation. And personally speaking, what disappoints me is I think the younger generation doesn't understand what hand-drawn, hand-colored, inked animation is.
Yeah.
And the nuance of the movement and this kind of thing. But that's a whole nother story because I have to close off this one. But
Okay.
thank you so much for your interview and
Thank
for your
you.
time.